なんかいいことあるの？
漏れなく玉木玲香特製ブロマイドを差し上げます。
Rika, don't make a habit of doing that when you get older. The Alopecia concerts are already attracting the weirdos. Cold open for this one featured Doremi and Reika doing something that we'll just see in the episode proper, so we'll skip it for now. Said episode proper open with some math questions that you can actually do at home, and probably should, considering that Baldus Jr. here decided to answer them. Actually, the answer to the second question should be 2 and 7/12, as 12 would be the lowest common denominator between 4, 2, and 6, and not 18. You could do it with that first problem, but not the second one. Anyway, Seki went on to explain the main plot of this episode, which was that they were going to decide their next student council president. Yeah, they were kind of revisiting that one plot point from the first season, though things had changed since then. The most obvious being that this is the position of student council rather than class president, and the fact that the Ojamajo were now in different classes, and therefore Masaharu was now in a different class than Doremi and Momoko. We'll get to probably the biggest change in just a bit, but first, Jay Leno Jr. had to throw in his ballot. You say that, and yet you still make careless mistakes with your math. Of course, being a class president didn't just automatically qualify him as a candidate for council president. Thus, their class decided to have their own election to select their representative. This led to the biggest and yet also most welcome change-up since the first season. Momoko ended up nominating Reika to be their representative. Yeah, after she was the antagonist in that previous election episode, she would end up getting the full support of Momoko and later Doremi, and I really like this on multiple levels. For one, it obviously shows how much more comfortable the original Ojamajo had become with her, and maybe even more impressively, how she actually managed to win over the newest one in Momoko, especially after their problematic episode to say the least. Ironically enough, Rick herself was a little reluctant and likely wasn't even considering becoming the president, but when just a few kids got behind her, that was more than enough encouragement. Though of course, this didn't sit well with her ops. Later, we got a really good scene that highlighted why Momoko made the right call. As after establishing how much she loved her fancy little French handkerchief, and understandably didn't want Screech to touch it, Reika ended up using it on a girl who was bullied by some brats who got her wet. I especially loved how she purposely made herself wet to make the kid feel like she wasn't alone. Granted, she still talked like a smug bitch afterwards, but actions speak louder than words or something like that. In any case, like most elections, things eventually devolved into just some pay squabbles, and Thanos Jr. here definitely came off as the slimier of the two, as he brought Reika's past failures. Don't want to hear that from you, Naruto. I mean, you can't even raise your kids right. Ironically enough, I would say this is one of the more civilized electoral debates I've ever seen. But yeah, this led to probably my favorite moment in the whole episode, where Reika didn't say anything, but rather really took in what the Tick Jr. said, and actually did reflect on her past failures, which often were the result of her own ego going out of control. Compound that with Momoko calling out earlier in the season, and Reika should of course start to realize the main errors of her way, which very thankfully they were addressing here with just this little moment of reflection from her. This is a really great way of redeeming a bully character by not just ignoring their past transgressions, but rather having them acknowledge them and learn from them. Love to see it. Conversely, her opponent was pretty flat, as Captain Quirk Jr. kind of took up the bully position, and yet was even less entertaining than Reika at her worst, with him just coming off as really one-dimensional. But yeah, he ended up proving that book smarts don't necessarily equate to street smarts, as he actively chose not to campaign for his election, which, let's be honest, that's at least 90% of what decides most elections. Hell, his book smarts weren't even perfect either. Anyway, Momoko and Doremi helped promote their choice. Okay, now this is starting to sound like a real presidential debate. So, to no one's surprise, he ended up losing handily to Reika as their class's representative. As a result, the Crimson Chin Jr. gave the same reaction that I think Kamala had last year.
どうして
You suck.
At the same time, Masaharu was also running as the representative of the other Ojamajo's classroom, and of course, Reika didn't want to have to lose to him again. Thus, she ran the most Reika campaign ever, which, hey, as long as her class was cool with it, then a little ego-stroking wouldn't be that big a deal. Granted, there was one who didn't want to participate, though the issues were definitely more on him.
やるだけ無駄だってこと。どうせ落選するに決まってるんだからね。
Hey, Crab Guy, I think we found the kid you're looking for. Yeah, again, even if he's supposed to be the antagonist of this episode, Robbie Rotten Jr. was being way too unlikable to the point he was not at all engaging. I guess you could kind of say he represents Reika's previous entitled attitude, but again, he just doesn't have the same charm.
派手まあ素敵私の美しさがもっと引き立ちますわ
I don't know, I hear it's a hit amongst the gamers. Anyway, the election day came, and both candidates were given time to make speeches for their final push. Since they were in the same class as him, the other Ojamajo, led by Aiko, were trying to help Masaru, and sure enough, he ended up choking harder than Sleepy Joe by actually going full unconscious due to stage fright. Thus, Aiko had to help him by essentially pulling Bochi the puppet.
いや、そんなことはありません。選挙で謙遜してどないすんねん。
Now watch as my little buddy here sings while I drink this water. With that, Reika's turn came, with Doremi agreeing to help her.
ここまで来てどうしようも何もないでしょ
Yeah, don't worry. Just remember to talk about the tariffs, and I'm sure everyone will be on board with it. Nah, of course, they end up revisiting that comedy duo routine that was hinted at in the cold opening, and to their credit, it was pretty hilarious. Hell, between this and the ventriloquist act, this whole climax is pretty great. It also acted as a resolution to Hellshake Yano Jr.'s character arc, as he was made to realize that really grade school elections shouldn't be taken that seriously. I mean, let's be honest, unless they're fighting some evil corpos, these kids actually aren't doing that much other than handing out flyers and reading speeches that the teachers will give them. A simple, but I guess good enough lesson of the day, which of course led to him voting for Reika. Not that she really needed, as of course she won by a landslide against a kid who couldn't even read his own speech. With that, the episode ended with Reika celebrating winning both the electoral and popular vote, even though again, these things are glorified popularity contests, or actually maybe that's why she's laughing like a maniac. This episode was way more entertaining than some real-life elections, which yes, I do consider to be a fairly high bar. I mean, for one thing, it really highlighted the great character arc Reika has gone over these 3 seasons, and the comedy was spot on throughout. Granted, like most elections, there was also that one stick in the mud who kind of brings things down, and in this case, it had a massive chin. Let's just get this out of the way. Reno, and yes, I'll call him by his real name here at least, was just a lame antagonist. Like, it's one thing to have an obnoxious rival character, but it's a whole other thing when they're just so boring because they refuse to do anything for most of the story. This kid and his massive chin injections thought that he was just somehow automatically entitled to become president, and thus chose to not do any sort of actual campaigning, so of course he lost. If this is supposed to be a lesson about not being an entitled brat, well, I guess they succeeded, but also, duh, that's kind of what this whole show is about, so it's rather redundant. Thankfully, pretty much everything else in this episode was fantastic. First and foremost, this felt like a fantastic culmination of Reika's character arc throughout the series. She is still kind of the stereotypical Ojou-sama, but now does genuinely care about what others think about her, and wants to actually earn that respect, which to her credit, she certainly did here in her own unique way. I mean, at the very least, that comedy routine with Doremi would have required a lot of practice. But yeah, also, the climax was just an absolute laugh riot thanks to both candidates. Thus, overall, and ignoring Popeye Jr., this is a really entertaining episode that also had some really strong character moments for Reika. If both of your candidates sucked, which they often do, sometimes you should just stick with the more entertaining one, as at least they'll make the 4 years bearable. Thanks for watching, and if you want to stay out of politics, 1, good call, and 2, our videos can help distract you from that stuff. I mean, we usually try to stay out of that stuff unless there's some, like, good jokes to be made, which, yes, is often the case. But still, look forward to whatever comes next. Until then, though, farewell for now, my friends, and, yes? Oh, no, I'm okay. I already have a hat, and that red one looks kind of gaudy, honestly.